Hoople's cat, just getting ready to take the dogs for boarding tomorrow, and the next day go to the Ontario Preppers meet, which I'm really excited about. Hopefully I'll get some good footage of me and Leslie in her first prepper, at her first prepper meet. Anyway, I digress. There's been a lot of talk forever on the internet and forums and everywhere else about inch bags and the I'm never coming home bag. Not quite as much as talk about Bugout bags, but anyway. Currently, at the beginning of July 2017, there's a lot of people showing inch bags and components of inch bags and what they're going to do with their inch bag and what tools they'll use in their inch bag and stuff like that. And I just wanted to give you my perspective on it, which is somewhat different, I think. The truth is with bugging out that you need to leave very early if you're going to use a car, and it's best if you're going to have a bug out location that you're extremely mega rich and that you have squads of people who can actually take you and protect you and to go there. But that's not me. So if I have to leave my home, which is my primary bug-in place, what will happen to me? What would I do? The inch bag philosophy is an interesting one, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So the smart have actually moved into their bug out locations already. If you don't need to travel, it makes you a lot safer and securer. But that's not what everybody can do. So most people who are probably classified as preppers really don't live in their bug out location, and their locations may not be ideal. Lots of people have various opinions on this, like if you live in California you're dead, if you live in the middle of New York City you're dead. There's various opinions and none of them are true. As with everything in prepping, nobody has actually lived through a massive global catastrophe, and so nobody actually really knows what they're talking about, they're just guessing. And I'm basically doing the same. The truth is, if you have to leave your location for whatever reason and never return to it, most people, from what I can see, are planning to carry vast quantities of material in cars. Now, some cars may work, some cars may not work, etc., etc. But I'm fairly sure for most people in where their locations are, even quote, knowing the back roads, is very risky. I'm not sure the back roads are going to be accessible in a major, massive grid down situation, but from my experience, when one highway goes off in Toronto, the side roads for quite some ways around it are jammed solid, and if you add to that various other factors that might be going on, it's not a great plan. So people fall on the inch bag, massive bag, put it on your bag, head out the door, okay? With this massive bag, with all the tools, food, supplies and equipment they need to go into a forest and live there forever, a lot of them are actually planning to take their spouses and their kids and even pets. Now, I don't know about you, but currently I have far too much fat and far too little endurance to carry a massive pack into the wilderness and survive. The reality of the concept, when you actually think about it, is depressing. And I believe that it's a death trap. A mental death trap that could be a physical death trap in SHTF, to actually have an inch bag and buy into the concept of going into the forest with just that bag and surviving. And I will explain why, but frankly, to carry all the supplies and gear and food you need and wildlife purification and shelter and stuff like that in most parts of North America, and to a wilderness area with no supply, pre-supply, no extra supply afterwards, probably you make it 1 or 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer, but it's going to be very unpleasant and it's not sustainable at all. And I would refer you at this point to one of the links below, which is part of the Wooded Beardsman series, where he actually went into the Ontario forest with lots of skills and no food for 5 nights. It's interesting. But many preppers are continuing to push the inch bag concept as the same theory. Hey. So lots of preppers like Prepper Nurse One and Reality Survival and various others, and I'm sorry to forget to mention you, have actually moved into their bug out locations, which is what I would advise you do if you can. Live where you intend to stay. Definitely that's the way to go. So most of us will be walking to a bug out location if we're forced to relocate. So the inch bag philosophy, that I never get home bag philosophy, is that you can just take a bag that you pre-made, and when you look at the internet you'll see vast quantities of material and different approaches, and live unaided in the woods. I guess they're thinking of hunting and trapping and fishing and anyway, paleo diet, I guess. But most of us are not going to make it. The inch bag's too heavy, the equipment in it we can't use. The areas we're going to will be dangerous because there'll be the world's worst predator there, us, in large parts of America and probably large parts of Canada, rural Canada. There'll also be human predators out there with guns. The locals will not take kindly to you going into their areas and trapping. And I have too much fat and too little endurance to make it anyway. So to carry all the supplies that you need to start afresh in the wilderness without having pre-supplied the area with your spouse and your kids and your pets, it's going to be very, very difficult. I don't think people are going to make it more than 1 or 2 weeks in a big major grid down situation by even trying that, and that's assuming they can get there. So you need to have a look at the Wooded Beardsman series, where he actually goes into the Ontario wilderness with really good skills and a partner and decides to live off the land. It's a fascinating series of videos, and the comment sections are excellent because they bring up a lot of different issues. Yet the inch bag concept is continually being pushed. A great guy, great channel, Step 1 Survival, is currently doing this. He's encouraging people to show the contents of their inch bags, and that's a great idea. And don't get me wrong, I watch most of these videos and I get a lot out of them. What I get out of them is what I should be pre-supplying in possible bug out locations that will be in sealed plastic totes buried in the ground in non-obvious locations close to and near to where I think I might need to go if my primary residence is compromised in SHTF. Now if I can drive there, that's great. I'm going to load it up, load the car with anything and everything I have, and that's going to help me starve for a little longer in the wilderness before I die. Now if I have to carry a bag into the wilderness, one of the things people aren't taking into consideration is the fact that carrying weight costs calories. And even a water bottle, and this is personal experience, even one water bottle in your hand running a 26.2 mile marathon, if you don't switch hands, your arms are actually in agony. It doesn't take much for most of us to suffer, and suffering in SHTF to get from your primary location to a bug out location is not a good idea. You want to go as fast as possible. Being outside is an obvious risk. So the inch bag philosophy, even if you're using it as a super bug out bag, a super get to a location bag, is flawed. I mean, I've seen people put stoves, fishing gear, various people put like ammunition of the yin yang in there. All of that weight has to be carried, all of that weight has to be carried by burning calories. And the more weight you carry, the slower you're going to go and the less far you're going to be able to travel every day, and the more prone you're going to be to blisters and ankle and injuries and back injuries. Like if you've got a bug out location, that's great, and everybody should have 1 or 2 areas where they think, you know what, if the Daleks come and take over my particular area, in my little farm, my homestead, where would I go, what would I do? So it's a good idea to put stuff in locations that are wilderness or close to wilderness and bury them in the ground, just in case. If you don't need to bug out, those areas should be close enough to get to from your primary location to actually use those supplies in SHTF. That's assuming that your primary location isn't a compromised one. You know, if you can look out your window and see the chimney stacks of a nuclear power station, or you can hear the jets taking off from the Air Force Base, you probably should definitely move. So, imagine 50 pounds or 80 pounds plus on your back, stressed, no supply, no stores are open, and you're staggering through the urban, rural, semi-rural environment in SHTF with your family and your kids and your pets. There's going to be no stores open, the roads in the towns are likely to be pitch black and possibly full of hostile people. So even if you make it, and I don't think many will, and you arrive in the wilderness area, you build your camp using your tools and you set your traps and your lines, are you now going to live like a king in SHTF? Will your family live like royalty. I have serious doubts that the concept itself from almost everybody is flawed. I'm sure a handful of people could do this. Certainly a lot of the ex-military types believe they can because they've had training. But in my experience, military types have training to survive and fight for 1 to 2 weeks. And much like going into the wilderness area, they're surviving by resupply or they're surviving by slow starvation. They are not thriving in the wilderness areas. And I think they're kidding themselves that they've got the skills to do this. I think a tiny handful of people can do this, but almost nobody that I've ever seen on the internet can do it. And I'm sorry if that offends people. I know I can. So, what is going on mentally with preppers going on about inch bags? I think it's the confusing the idea of a bag of tools to help you survive. I think they're confusing the whole concept. The idea is to actually have things available to you when nobody else has them or when you need them without external resupply to be able to thrive and survive. That's a great concept, and it's actually the root of prepping, and that goes along with a lot of the hoarding we do. But the I'm never coming home bag, what's going to happen to you if you try that? That will be fascinating. Lots of discussions on the web about the availability of fish and game in SHTF. I think it's best to assume that us negative people are right and you won't be able to get anywhere near enough game, at least for a year or two, until most of the humans are dead. So how much stuff do you need to bug out? And like I said, I think the inch bag concept's silly. I'm sorry, but it is. But how much gear do you actually need? So a guy called Nimble Will Nomad, who's an American, quite famous in his own right. This guy is a bit strange, but aren't we all? I am. So he relies on kindness and foraging fast food restaurants for his food, and he basically travels mega distances when it's not winter in the United States and parts of Canada without using hotels, cars, or resupply. His story is fascinating. I'm not going to go into it. I just want to talk about the lessons that Nimble has for me and for you in terms of bugging out an inch bag. So he's nearing 75 now, and he lives most of the winter in an RV. He only exists now of social security checks. He was extremely wealthy until he was about 60. When he went wandering off at 61 in search of peace, he did about 4,400 miles, which is quite something. So do search YouTube for Nimble Will Nomad, and he also developed a low fuel stove called the Little Dandy, which is kind of a rocket stove, which is interesting. This stuff's fascinating. So that's really that for this segment. I'm trying to do multiple videos and cut and paste and put in some slides rather than talk over them. As I said, my channel, I'm developing it, so we'll see how I go over time. Hopefully I'll get really slick, but I'm not. So at 61 he went the 4,400 miles from Florida to Cape Gaspé in Quebec. That's quite a feat for anybody. And he's done every single major long distance trail in the United States, and he's mostly done them more than once. He does it solo, he does it with minimal equipment, and currently around about now he's in Texas or just leaving Texas because he's walking from New Mexico to Florida. Now the idea of walking from New Mexico to Florida is pretty daunting for most people, but you know, he's actually going in a loop. So he's actually going to touch the four corners of the continental USA, going from New Mexico to Florida. Pretty different. So what can we as preppers learn from Nimble Will? He carries minimal clothing, but he does use windstock material. Wind and rain are not great for anybody. All of this cloth camo gear that people are wearing because they want to look like they're in the army may not be the best type of stuff. He uses very, very thin, cheap nylon because it stops the wind and the rain just accumulates and dries out quickly. He's deeply tanned on his face and his hands, but He wears long sleeve shirts, white shirts all the time, and he wears a white hat all the time. So this is not exposed, because one of the things that people don't, hey Becky, one of the things people don't realize is actually having your skin exposed to the sun for prolonged periods. Yes, it can cause sunburn, but it actually causes severe dehydration over time. You're literally basically roasting, dehydrating yourself, and it's smart not to do that. White's not a great choice for OPSEC, and so you have to figure out what time of year it is and what you're going to do. But like I say, think about clothing choices. Don't just go with combat gear. He's had all 10 of his toes surgically removed. When I used to run ultra marathons, a lot of the runners would have toenails removed because they would have real blisters and problems under the toes, and they're incredibly painful. I was actually blessed it never really happened to me. So again, don't think you have to have your toenails removed to do this sort of activity. He does not wear hiking boots. He does not wear military boots. He wears sneakers, battered cheap sneakers. I agree with him on this. I use running trail shoes for hiking, for walking, and I would use them in a bug out. I think there is a place for military combat boots if you are going to fight people and stomp on their heads, but they're heavy, and again, weight, every time you lift your foot, it's extra calories out, more strain in. Think about that. Now, if you wear combat military boots all the time and you regularly go on 5, 10, 12 mile hikes with huge 58-pound packs, you know, once or twice a week, then this can carry on. But that's not reality for most of us. Now, where he sleeps, he finds isolated pockets of semi-wild wilderness. Now, he only does on roads, which I think is fascinating, and he faces the traffic. And if you're running or walking, always face the traffic, so you can jump out of the way when they aim at you. Never have the traffic coming up behind you. It's bad. So he finds these wilderness, semi-wilderness areas, and that's where he camps, and he just sleeps on the ground. Now, I am aware of semi-wilderness areas around me, but I'm not aware enough. I've never really looked at some of the semi-wilderness areas, and aren't that big, and thought, could I rough camp there and be okay and nobody would find me, even if people were not driving around distracted by TV and YouTube. I think that's a good idea to do that. Google Maps satellite of your area and any areas you might bug out to. You should have them printed out and maybe even laminated. I'm not a big fan of lamination, but it may be a good idea. One of the key principles Nimble Will does is he walks at a steady pace, up and down hills on the straight and narrow. His pace is about 3 miles an hour. There is a combat, there is a bug out, there is a racing pace. When you hit that sweet spot, you can keep that going for an awful long time. If you go a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast, you're going to have problems. Use the inclines and the twists to help you. So when you are going in a straight line on a road for a long period of distance, try and walk on either side of the road, bearing in mind traffic. You have to be careful, so you're not just walking on the one camber of the road all the time. Over hours, that will really hurt you. And there's a great old video from Prepper Logic out there where he actually does, I think, a 36-mile bug out from Toronto, and he had massive blister problems. When I look back at that video, I do think he was walking on one side of the road, and when you're not used to that, it's going to harm you. Your legs are usually fairly even. Switch everything out, rest yourself. So he has a tiny bug out bag. What does he have?